the scientists now know that there is in human nature a divide between what we sometimes call liberals and conservatives. And it gives an advantage, you can speculate, to the human species to have some people who are temperamentally inclined to try to change the future and experiment with new things, and others who are temperamentally inclined to say, hey, wait a minute, not too fast. Let's make sure we don't do anything rash here. And this divide is found in every country, every culture, every ethnicity. It's part of our human makeup. And when these natural tendencies are accentuated with political ideologies, or for that matter, religious factions and the other divides that are sometimes used for advantage, then it can get out of hand.
What does that mean to you?
Well, first, I'm very disappointed that Al Gore made these silly remarks, not addressing any political point of view, but simply on the facts, he's dead wrong. On the history, he's completely wrong. The science is junk science, and the philosophy is at the base of the same philosophy that gave us eugenics in the United States, which sought to destroy 90% of our neighbors, eventually 10% at a time, beginning with some 14 million people in the first years of the 20th century, and then continuing to take off 10% at a time, and ultimately resulted in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. That's not a broken line, that's not a jagged line, that's a direct line.
Right.
The factual history that it is the liberals who are the great innovators. Henry Ford, who was one of the greatest innovators in the 20th century, Thomas Edison, Patton, these men were ultra-conservative to a fault. They were some of the greatest innovators in the history of the world.
I believe, however, Henry Ford agreed with Hitler on the Jews, wanted to get rid of the Jews.
I think it was Henry Ford who inspired Hitler in many ways. It was Henry Ford who gave Hitler the concept of the international Jewish conspiracy through the mass production and the printing and the publication of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Right.
And therefore, it was no longer just about getting rid of the Jews in your midst, as Hitler originally wanted to do, but now
it's worldwide.
It was, if you're going into Czechoslovakia, get rid of the Jews. If you're going into Poland, get rid of the Jews. So now it's not just territorial conquest, it's territorial conquest and get rid of this enemy.
Okay.
That's Henry Ford.
All right. So now take me back to, because what I got from Al Gore is, look, it's genetic. There's people that want to move us forward, and there's people that want to move us backwards. They want to hold on. And it's not just that there are, because those, as he says it with a laugh, those things happen. You know, maybe we have to slow down from time to time. But what's really dangerous is when those people, he explains, are co-opted by religious or political organizations, because then those religious and political organizations are only using those stupid people to stop us from doing progress.
This is politicized science. And this same politicized science that was used in the United States became a national biology, eugenics, also became an instrument of terror in the Third Reich, where anyone who was deemed to be out of favor with the Third Reich was automatically declared to be an enemy of the state, and they found some eugenic problem in his DNA. Remember, under eugenics, you were not born into prostitution. Prostitution was born into you.
Right.
And so this is a horrible conjunction of junk science and politics. Once again, I like Al Gore for some of the things that he has done, and I'm extremely disappointed. And when your staff sent this to me, I barely believed that he would say such a silly thing. You must remember that the 60,000 people who were sterilized in this country, the unknown millions of never born, the hundreds of thousands who were condemned to live in incarceration camps called sanitariums, the many marriages that were voided, the unknown number of marriages that were never allowed to take place because of the criminalization of interracial marriage, all of these different things. This was all a series of laws and theories set into place by the elite of America, the progressives, the do-gooders, the liberals, the people who wanted to make the world a better place.
The same people that brought us prohibition brought us this stuff.
Actually, that's actually very correct.
There's one other thing that we were talking about, and I said to the audience to make sure that you pay attention to this, and you just mentioned it, the sterilization. Now in Oregon, and you couldn't believe it when we brought it up, right? That in Oregon now, you can, if you're 15 years old, you can be sterilized without your parents' permission.
I have studied the sterilization laws in all of the states and in many of the federal programs which are above the states. And I was very involved in the efforts by the North Carolina legislature to recognize, apologize, and compensate for the past transgressions, the genocidal transgressions of mass sterilization. I've known that Oregon was a holdout and still had some vestiges of sterilization. I granted the interview to the reporter who wrote that story, but when I looked through the details in greater nuance after your staff sent it to me, I was absolutely amazed, disappointed, and I'm still having a hard time believing that the federal government is going back to authorizing and funding and encouraging sterilization.
It helps anybody who wants to be in control. It helps them with all kinds of problems if we just have people just sterilize themselves. Hang on just a second. Back in just a moment.
None of you are going to be happy to hear what I have to say. It's not good news. You're going to get angry. You're going to be shocked. We are talking about Nazi eugenics. This was Hitler's idea for a master race. But very few people are aware that the idea originated not in Nazi Germany, but in the United States 2 to 3 decades before Hitler came to power.
If you want a history book that you have, history that you just won't learn anyplace else, get War Against the Weak. Let me take us from history to the future here. And if we have time, we'll come back to history. But we're seeing I believe that we are seeing the seeds that are very, very disturbing unless people wake up. We're seeing a loss of caring of life. We're seeing a loss of love for my neighbor and the people in my community. We're seeing a pitting against each other for political purposes. And we're seeing now something new that the world has never seen before, and that is the upgrade of humans, which most people don't know is coming very soon. And it's called the transhumanist movement. I've never heard of the transhumanist movement. Tell me about it.
I first studied the transhumanist movement about 10 years ago when I first wrote War Against the Weak, and learned that it was a society that was trying to engineer their own genetic future, their own human design. It's self-enhanced and self-managed evolution. Quite clearly, it means that if an individual within the transhumanist movement has the technology and the desire and the money and the wherewithal to inject armadillo DNA into his own to get hard skin and become a big warrior, or perhaps a great singer or anything, then they will go ahead and do that. And they will see a divide within the world, within society, the gen rich or the gen ennobled, those who are genetically superior, and all those who are destined to serve them.
Correct.
Which is, of course, the Hitler motif.
And now this sounds absolutely crazy, but Al Gore talks about it in his book.
I was astonished to read that this morning.
Yeah.
And he also falsely gives the history of eugenics with lip service to some of Hitler's greatest allies in the United States, such as Harry Laughlin from the Carnegie Institution.
Okay, so he talks about it, and it's not really armadillo skin. You say one of the leaders of this is a guy who's been on this program before, Ray Kurzweil.
Well, he's one of the members, the leaders of the transhumanist program.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And it's not armadillo, it's electronics. You're upgrading yourself, at least.
It's
from
anything.
what I know.
Armadillo skin is just one example. You might want to put a computer chip in your mind.
Correct.
You might want to sharpen your eyesight in a certain way. Anything that the individual feels is good for him to enhance his own evolution, it is personal selection and self-managed evolution.
Okay. If it was just somebody who was doing this themselves, it wouldn't necessarily be so disturbing as it is that this is something that leads to corporations being involved. And I want to take a quick break, and I want you to come back and tell me about what you see the next genocide possibility would be.
Okay.
I am concerned about many things. I'm concerned about the lack of civility all the way to the lack of understanding of the value of life. And the mask is starting to come off of some of these progressives that really don't understand the value of life. And you believe that there is a new kind of genocide coming, and it involves corporate genocide. What do you mean
Well, genocide includes, as one of its tenets, interference with reproduction on an organized basis to eliminate a group. That's one of the legislated aspects of genocide.
Okay.
And so is the effort to eliminate the financial and other wherewithal of a group that allows them to survive. I believe that now we are confronted with new eugenics, and it will no longer be a matter of national flags and racial dogma that determine who is enabled and who is persecuted and who is marginalized and no longer allowed to thrive and perhaps not even to exist. It will now be corporate worth. It will now be how important are we to the corporations that will once again control this entire arena.
Right, and it's not the corporations by themselves. It's the combining of the corporation with the government.
Well, in the case of eugenics, it was the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Harriman Railroad fortune that combined to create, invent, fund, and proliferate the junk science of eugenics. And the Rockefeller Foundation even helped finance Hitler's greatest Nazi doctors, including Otmar Verschoor, whose assistant...
From Long Island, right?
Well, Verschoor was communicating with Long Island, but Verschoor was a Nazi doctor, and his assistant was Josef Mengele, who went in to Auschwitz to continue the twin experiments that the Rockefeller Foundation had funded through his boss, Otmar Verschoor. In Long Island, in Cold Spring Harbor, this was the outpost, the headquarters of eugenics in the United States. It was a nexus for eugenics worldwide, and it was the partnership with Nazi Germany that was threaded through the Eugenics Record Office and the Carnegie Institution at Cold Spring Harbor. What's happening now is there is an effort to identify people genetically for what is believed to be their value to the corporations because they have the ability to, and deny them a job, deny them insurance, deny them financing, deny them housing. Mm-hmm. And in England, this led to legislation known as the Anti-Discrimination Act to avoid the so-called genetic ghetto, which was passed unanimously in the United States by the Senate and then held up for 2 years in the House through the lobbying efforts of the insurance companies. It's the insurance companies that will lead the way to eugenics.
Okay. We could do a lot more here. I will just tell you this, that he is the guy who has the history key. And you are going to see what he has written about happen again, and you're already beginning to see the foundations of it. Please do your homework on it now.